The wind howled through the trees like a beast searching for blood. Rain slashed against the window panes of Jack Murdoch's cabin, blurring the darkened world outside into streaks of gray and shadow. Thunder cracked overhead, sharp, violent, like cannon fire echoing through time, and Jack sat still as stone in his chair by the fire, a half-smoked pipe clenched between his teeth, eyes fixed on the dancing flames. The storm had risen fast, creeping across the hills just after sundown, and now it raged like the Civil War had come back for him. He didn't mind storms, not usually. Not the ones made by nature, anyway. They were honest. They told you what they were. But something about this one, it scratched at his bones. The pine logs hissed in the hearth. Jack exhaled slow, watching the curl of smoke drift upward and disappear. It was a silence he'd grown used to, this lonesome, steady rhythm of wind, rain, and fire. His land stretched out for miles in all directions, ringed by pine and rock, no neighbors within shouting distance, just the way he liked it. Just the way it had to be. He leaned forward, brushing a calloused hand over the rifle resting across his knees. Habit, more than need. There hadn't been any trouble out here for months. Maybe a hungry wolf near the chicken coop. Once, a cougar had taken a goat, but the Comanche hadn't ridden near in a long while. Not since the last of the skirmishes pushed most of them deeper west. Still, Jack knew better than to think peace meant safety. He'd seen enough to know the difference. A sharp, sudden knock rattled against his mind, like a whisper in the storm. He sat upright. Not a sound he recognized. Not wind. Not wood creaking, something else. Then again, there, a faint thud, wet and irregular, like flesh hitting mud. Jack stood. He moved to the door, boot heels echoing on the wood floor. Thunder rumbled again. He unlatched the iron bolt and pulled the door open against the wind. The night outside was a maelstrom, trees bent, their branches clawing the air. Lightning flashed, revealing a blur of green and brown landscape. At first, he saw nothing. Then, in the next bolt of white fire from the sky, he spotted it. No, her. A figure crumpled at the edge of the clearing, near the tree line. Small, still, barely distinguishable from the soaked earth. Jack stepped out without thinking. Rain lashed against his coat, his hat, soaking through to his skin in seconds. He trudged forward, eyes never leaving the unmoving form. As he got closer, the shape became clearer. A girl, maybe 15, maybe less, drenched and caked in mud. Her dress, or what remained of it, was torn at the seams. One of her arms bent at an unnatural angle. Her feet were bare, bruised, bloody. Her lips trembled, her chest barely moved. He knelt beside her. She flinched at his touch, even half-conscious. Her skin was burning with fever. Her black hair was matted to her forehead. She made a sound, more instinct than speech. Her eyes fluttered open, and in them Jack saw something that made him still. Not fear, not even pain, just exhaustion, the kind that came from running long and far. He knew that look. He'd worn it once, after Gettysburg. The girl collapsed again into his arms. Jack didn't move at first, didn't think. His mind spun with what she was, what she might mean. She wasn't white. Her skin, her hair, the beadwork around her neck, it all told him the same thing. Comanche. That meant trouble. Real trouble. If someone saw him with her, he could be strung up by his own neighbors. If her people found her here, he could be dead by morning. And yet, she was a child. Broken. Alone. Dying. He gritted his teeth and hoisted her into his arms. The storm seemed to rage louder as he carried her back toward the cabin, as if angry at his choice. Wind tugged at his coat. The rain tried to blind him. He kicked the door open and set her down gently on the rug near the fire. She whimpered once and curled into herself like a wounded animal. Jack locked the door behind him, bolted it tight, and dropped to one knee beside her. He moved quickly, removing her wet rags with care, draping a blanket over her, then fetching water and a clean cloth. She was light. Too light. Starved, maybe. And her arm, he winced as he examined the break. It was clean, but swollen. He wrapped it tight, muttering to himself under his breath. He hadn't done this in years, hadn't looked after anyone since. No, he shook the thought away. She stirred. Her eyes blinked open again. Jack crouched beside her with a cup of water. She tried to sit up and failed. He steadied her, letting her sip. "Don't go dying on me," he muttered, voice gravel low. "You made it this far." She didn't answer, just looked at him with eyes too old for her age. She didn't speak English. Or she didn't trust him enough yet, that was fair. He barely trusted himself. The fire warmed the room. Outside, the storm rolled on. But inside, the girl began to breathe steadier. Jack moved to the corner, dragged over the cot he'd built years ago for a guest who never came, and placed her gently on it. He covered her with another blanket, dry now, wool-lined. He watched her for a long moment, then stepped back to his chair by the fire. This was a mistake. He knew it. The war was over, but scars ran deep. He'd seen men kill for less. Take a Comanche girl into your house, and you might as well paint a target on your door. But what was he supposed to do? Leave her out there? He closed his eyes. Rain tapped against the roof. He remembered his daughter's laugh, her face, her small hand gripping his thumb. He remembered the fever, the day she stopped breathing, the hole he'd dug alone. He opened his eyes again. The fire snapped. The girl turned slightly in her sleep. Damn it all. Jack stood and busied himself with boiling some water, crushing herbs from an old pouch he kept in the cabinet. Things he'd learned from the old Mexican woman who lived down the river once, before she disappeared. Fever root, she called it. Smelled like hell, but it worked. By the time the brew was done, the girl was awake again, barely. He helped her drink it, slow, spoon by spoon. She didn't resist. He noticed the bruises then. Not just from running. No, finger marks, grips, a welt across her back. Someone had hurt her, recently. That made his jaw tighten. He sat beside her again. She watched him through a veil of pain and heat. He tried a few words, simple ones. "You hungry?" No answer. "Where from?" Nothing. He pointed at himself. "Jack." She blinked. He repeated, slower. "Jack." She frowned, as if trying to understand. Then she opened her mouth, her voice little more than a rasp. "Na. Yeli." He leaned forward. "Nayeli." She nodded once, barely. Jack sat back, the name echoing in his mind. It meant something, maybe. He didn't know. But it was hers. He offered her a faint nod. "All right then, Nayeli, you're safe here." She closed her eyes again. Sleep took her. Jack returned to his chair, rifle across his lap. He didn't sleep that night. He kept the fire going. Watched the door. Listened to the storm. Somewhere in the dark, beyond the trees, he knew eyes were watching. And now he wasn't alone anymore. The morning mist clung to the trees like breath on glass, softening the edges of the pine trunks and rolling across the ground in low curls. The cabin stood quietly amid it all, smoke curling from the chimney, the wooden walls damp from dew and old rain. Birds chirped cautiously from the branches, testing the silence. Jack Murdoch was already awake. He had been since before the light came. He moved about the cabin with practiced quiet, careful not to wake the girl still sleeping on the bed. Nayeli had begun to stir more each day, but she was far from healed. He could tell by the way she winced when she moved, the way she rubbed her arm when she thought he wasn't watching. She was getting stronger, yes, but strength didn't come quickly to the wounded, not the kind she carried. Jack brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat at the table, the heat warming his face as he sipped. He watched her sleep half wrapped in a blanket, her bare feet poking out. The bruise on her cheek had begun to fade into a sickly green, and the swelling around her eye was nearly gone. She looked younger in sleep, not a girl on the run or a fugitive of violence, but simply a child. That thought unsettled him more than he cared to admit. When she woke, her eyes found his instantly. There was no grogginess, no slow stirring. She went from asleep to alert in the blink of an eye, like an animal used to surviving. She sat up, rubbed her shoulder, and blinked at him. "Good morning," he said. She gave him a short nod, but said nothing. That was the way of it between them. Small nods, gestures, glances. Words came slow, and even when they did, they were few. Jack didn't mind. Silence had been his companion for years. He passed her a plate of cornbread and beans. She took it without looking up, murmured something that might have been thanks, and ate with neat, measured bites. Jack didn't press for talk. For the first few days, he had tried. Questions mostly: where she came from, how long she'd been running, if she remembered who hurt her. She had answered some, ignored others, and now mostly stared when he asked. He took that as her boundary and left it. After breakfast, he brought in wood from the shed, chopping extra and stacking it beside the hearth. Nayeli watched him from the porch, sitting cross-legged with a blanket around her shoulders, face turned toward the trees. Her hair was cleaner now, tied loosely with a piece of string he'd given her. She still didn't smile, not often, but her eyes had softened since that first night. She didn't flinch when he walked past her anymore. Later that morning, she followed him to the barn. It was the first time she'd left the porch. Jack didn't say anything, just held the gate open and let her step inside. The air smelled of hay, old wood, and the musk of horses. The mule lifted its head and brayed softly. "This is Charlie," Jack said, patting the mule's side. "Ugly son of a gun, but he's loyal." Nayeli stepped close, cautious, and raised a hand to touch the animal's flank. Charlie snorted but didn't move. "Gentle," Jack said. She nodded. They spent the morning cleaning the stalls. She worked without being asked, using the pitchfork like she'd handled one before. Jack said nothing, just watched her out of the corner of his eye. She didn't ask questions, she didn't complain. Just worked in silence beside him, until the sun climbed high and sweat shined on her forehead. When they sat for lunch, Jack laid out some jerky, bread, and dried apples. Nayeli ate quickly, her appetite growing by the day. "You're a hard worker," Jack said. She shrugged. "Back in your village, what did you do?" She paused, then held up two fingers and swept them like claws through the air. "Hunt?" Jack guessed. She shook her head and made a weaving motion, then mimed, carrying something heavy. "Gathering," he tried. She nodded. "Any brothers or sisters?" Her face darkened. She looked down at her bread and didn't answer. Jack regretted the question immediately. "Never mind," he said. "You don't have to talk about it." But her voice, quiet and deliberate, surprised him. "Mother taken. Father, fight." He looked at her, unsure what to say. She kept her eyes on the table. "People dead," she said. "Fire. Screams." Jack swallowed hard. He'd seen fires like that, smelled burning flesh, heard the shrieks of families caught in raids. It didn't matter which side it came from, white or native, pain sounded the same. "You don't have to carry it alone," he said. She didn't respond, but when he stood, she followed him outside again. The days took on a rhythm. Jack tended the land, Nayeli helped where she could. She collected herbs from the forest edge, pointing them out to him with names he didn't recognize. He showed her how to trap small animals, how to sharpen a blade, how to ride Charlie without spooking him. In return, she began teaching him small words in her language. At first, just nouns, sky, fire, water, but slowly more complex phrases. She had a soft voice but a strong will, and her gaze often held more than she was willing to say aloud. At night, they sat by the fire. Jack would whittle while she braided bits of leather into cords. She gave him one to tie around his wrist. He accepted it without asking what it meant. One evening, while the wind whispered through the pines, Jack saw her tracing patterns in the dirt outside the cabin. Circular lines. Dots, a symbol he didn't recognize. He crouched beside her. "What's that?" She tapped the center of the circle. "Home," she said, then pointed to the outer edge. "Danger." "Comanche?" She looked at him, then at the trees. "Eyes!" she whispered. Jack felt a chill crawl up his spine. That night, he walked the perimeter of his land, rifle in hand. He saw nothing, but the stillness felt wrong. Too quiet. Like something waiting. The next morning, he found boot tracks near the stream. 2 sets, moving carefully, circling the cabin's southern edge. One set was barefoot. Jack stared at them for a long time, then wiped them away with a branch. When he returned, Nayeli was already packing what little she had into a small bundle. "No," Jack said. "You're not leaving." "They come," she said, "soon." "I know, but I'm not sending you back out there." She looked at him, her eyes wide with something like fear, or sorrow, or both. "You will die," she said. Jack chuckled dryly. "That's not news, girl. I already should have a dozen times over." She stepped closer. "You good man, but they don't see." "I'm not afraid of dying," he said, then hesitated. "I'm afraid of not doing what's right." She stared at him a long moment, then nodded slowly. That night, she moved her bedding near the fireplace again, closer to where he slept. Neither of them said anything about it. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't the silence of strangers anymore. It was the quiet of people who didn't need to speak to understand. On the 3rd day after finding the tracks, the birds stopped singing. Jack stood on the porch, rifle across his back, axe in his hands. The wind was still. The sun barely filtered through the dense clouds. Nayeli stood behind him, silent and motionless. Something was coming. He could feel it. He looked down at her. "Whatever happens," he said, "you don't open that door unless it's me." She nodded once. That night, while he sharpened his blade by lantern light, Nayeli stepped close and placed her hand over his. He looked up. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Jack, I not forget." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. "Sleep," he said. "You'll need it." She turned to go, then paused. "Jack, my name, Nayeli," he smiled faintly. "I know." She looked at him, eyes holding his for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Means I am loved." She stepped into the darkness of the sleeping room, leaving Jack alone by the fire, holding a knife that no longer felt like a weapon, and a heart that no longer felt so empty. The wind had changed. Jack could feel it in the way the leaves didn't rustle like they used to, how the birds stayed silent even after sunrise, and how the mule, Charlie, refused to graze near the tree line anymore. Something had shifted in the forest, not just the usual unease that came with living on the edge of wild country, but a deeper, creeping kind of stillness. The kind of stillness that settled over a place when eyes were watching. Eyes that didn't blink. He walked the perimeter again that morning, rifle in hand, checking the traps and stopping by the stream. The water was lower than usual, the rocks dry along the banks. That wasn't what worried him. What worried him were the tracks, again, this time fresh, 3 sets. Boot prints, deep from heavy steps. Barefoot impressions alongside them, narrow, light, deliberate. None of them his. He crouched near the edge of the trail and touched one of the prints. Damp earth, pressed no more than an hour ago. Whoever it was, they were close. Too close. When he returned to the cabin, Nayeli was already outside, sitting on the porch with her knees tucked to her chest. She saw the expression on his face and stood before he spoke. "They're here," she said. "Not yet," he answered, "but they're looking." She nodded, as though she had known before he did. Jack didn't tell her everything he'd seen. She already knew the shape of danger better than most grown men. Her silence told him she'd expected this from the moment he found her. The rest of the day passed in a hush. They kept to themselves. Jack chopping more wood than usual, making excuses to stay outside and close to the tree line. Nayeli ground herbs with the mortar and pestle she'd salvaged from his cabinet, humming quietly in a tone that didn't belong to any language he recognized. It was calming and eerie all at once. That evening, Jack saddled Charlie and rode out toward the old trading post 5 miles east. The road was empty, but his hand never strayed far from the rifle resting across his lap. The sky had turned a coppery hue by the time he arrived. the clouds catching fire as the sun dropped low behind the hills. The trading post was little more than a cabin with a crooked sign and a rusted bell above the door. The place smelled of tobacco, old leather, and dust. Inside, the owner, a grizzled ex-trapper named Duncan, stood behind the counter, tallying tins of salt and jerky. "You look like hell," Duncan muttered without glancing up. "Appreciate the welcome," Jack said. "Heard anything?" "About what?" "Comanche or Kial. Anything moving west of the ridge?" Duncan snorted. "They're always moving. Question is whether they're looking to trade or scalp." "I'm not joking." "Neither am I." Jack bought more powder and shot, a few bags of flour, and a new whetstone. He paid in coin, not trade, and kept his questions brief. Duncan's eyes lingered on the long knife at Jack's hip. "You're preparing for something." Jack didn't answer. He packed his supplies, mounted Charlie, and turned back toward the cabin, his mind heavier than the saddle. It was nearly midnight by the time he returned. The moonlight filtered through the trees in long silver streaks, casting shadows that danced like spirits. As he dismounted and opened the cabin door, the fire was still burning low, and Nayeli sat beside it, wide awake, gripping her small knife. "Someone passed," she said without turning. "2, maybe 3. When?" "Not long after you left." "You sure?" She nodded. "They didn't come close, just circled." Jack sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "They're checking us. Testing." "What will you do?" He looked at her and answered honestly, "I don't know yet." The next morning, Jack rose early and began reinforcing the cabin. He checked every window, added another beam to the door, and reinforced the hinges. He moved supplies from the barn into the cellar, enough to last 2 weeks if they had to wait something out. Nayeli didn't question him. She helped carry sacks of flour, jars of dried corn, and the tools he hadn't touched in months. They dug a trench around the back of the cabin where the land dipped. Jack had done something similar during the war. A barrier, a line, a message. This land was watched, claimed, protected. Letting people know you were ready sometimes did more good than actually being ready. That afternoon, while chopping wood, Jack spotted movement in the tree line. A glint. Just a flicker. It was gone in a blink, but he knew he hadn't imagined it. He called Nayeli inside. "Stay in," he said. "Keep your knife close." "Jack," she said, voice lower than usual. "They're not just watching." He stared at her. "They're waiting," she continued. "For someone." "For who?" She didn't answer. 2 nights later, the answer arrived. The fire had died low, and Jack sat in the chair by the door, his rifle across his lap, half asleep with one ear open. A sound stirred him, a soft thud, not an animal. He stood, eased the door open, and stepped outside into the moonlight. At the edge of the clearing, something stood. A shape. Human, tall, wrapped in a cloak of fur and beads that shimmered even in the dark. Jack lifted his rifle, heart pounding. "Who's there?" The figure didn't move. Jack took a step forward. "I said." The figure raised a hand and let something drop to the ground before vanishing into the trees. Jack walked cautiously to where the figure had stood. On the ground, lit faintly by the moon, was a bundle of feathers and leather, a war token, and beside it, a carved totem. He picked it up slowly. It was shaped like a wolf, and carved on its side was a single glyph, a spear, crossed with a tree. Jack recognized it. He'd seen that mark once. On a shield carried by a war chief known as Iron Tooth, he returned to the cabin with the bundle, his face pale. Nayeli saw the totem and froze. "It's him," she said. "Your father?" She nodded slowly. "He's near." Jack stared at the token in his hand. "Then he knows you're here." "Yes. Why hasn't he come?" "He's waiting," she said again, "for the others." "For what others?" Nayeli's voice was no louder than a breath. "His warriors." The forest didn't sleep that night. The air was too tight, the wind too still. Jack didn't sleep either. He sat on the roof of the cabin, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the darkness. Dawn came slowly, painting the horizon in pale gold. The next day, Jack found more signs, twisted branches, new footprints, even a rabbit, freshly killed and left on his doorstep. Not eaten, not stolen. Left. A warning. That evening, a rider appeared on the ridge. Alone. Jack saw him from the fields. A man on horseback, silhouetted against the sky. He didn't move, didn't ride down, just watched. Jack rode out alone. He didn't bring the rifle, only a knife and a white cloth. The rider waited, still as stone. When Jack reached him, he saw the face beneath the paint. A hard, angular jaw, deep eyes, scars. A man carved from war. "You are the one," the man said in near-perfect English. Jack said nothing. "You took the girl. She came to me, bleeding. And you helped her." "Yes." The man studied him. "You know what that means?" "I do." "Then you know what comes next." "I know what might." The man looked toward the cabin, though it was barely visible from this distance. "She is not just a child. I figured that out. She is blood to Irontooth, a daughter of his line." "I don't want to fight." "Then leave her." Jack shook his head. "No." The rider nodded once. "Then we come tomorrow." Jack turned away. "Then I'll be ready." He rode back as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows through the trees. Nayeli was waiting for him at the edge of the field, barefoot and still. "They spoke to you," she said. "Yes." "And?" "They come at dawn." She didn't look surprised, only sad. Jack placed a hand on her shoulder. "I won't give you to them." She looked up at him. "You may have to." "No," he said, "I won't." They sat by the fire that night, without speaking, the silence, louder than words could ever be. The logs cracked, embers floating into the chimney like fading stars. Nayeli held the carved wolf in her hands and whispered to it. Jack didn't ask what she said. He sharpened his knife, cleaned the rifle, checked the door a final time. Outside, the night waited. So did the war, and all around them, the pines listened. Dawn broke without warning, slipping over the tops of the pines like a knife drawn through shadow. The sky was painted in streaks of gold and blood, the kind of morning that didn't speak of peace, but of reckoning. The air hung heavy, too still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. In the cabin, Jack Murdoch stood fully dressed by the window, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his knife tucked into the belt of his old Union coat. He hadn't slept, not even a little. Sleep was for men who had the luxury of time, and Jack knew he was out of it. Outside, the earth seemed to pulse beneath his boots, the first tremors rising up from the ground like distant thunder. It was the hooves, dozens of them, maybe more. They weren't rushing, not yet. They moved in unison, not like a wild stampede, but like a march. Controlled, ritualistic, determined. Nayeli sat on the bed, her hands folded in her lap, eyes wide but not afraid. She had braided her hair back with strips of red leather and tied a single black feather near her temple. The moment was close. She had known it before Jack did. He looked at her. She looked back. "It's time," he said. She nodded. He moved to the door and opened it slowly. The rising sun bathed the clearing in long orange light. The shadows between the trees danced like spirits in the mist. Then came the sound again, closer now. The hooves. Not one or two riders. Dozens, maybe 100. He stepped out onto the porch and stood tall. And they came, one by one, two by two, then in clusters. Comanche warriors appeared from the trees like ghosts made flesh. Their horses bore war paint, red and white swirls down muscled flanks. Their faces were painted in black lines, yellow streaks, dots beneath the eyes, feathers braided into their hair, bows slung across their backs, rifles resting across saddles. Spears tipped with obsidian and sharpened bone. It was not a band of hunters or scouts. It was a war party. and they were here for him. They did not speak. They did not charge. They simply rode until the clearing was full, surrounding the cabin in a wide circle, hooves stomping in slow rhythm, dust rising like smoke. Jack counted at least 80 before he stopped trying. There could have been more beyond the trees. One rider stepped forward, taller than the rest, broader. His horse was draped in black hide and bones, and across his chest he wore a breastplate of hollowed horn. His face was unpainted, save for a single red stripe running from his bottom lip to his chin. He dismounted without a word and walked forward, each step deliberate. His boots pressed into the dirt with weight, but not anger. Not yet. Jack stepped down from the porch and met him halfway. They stood 3 paces apart. "You're Iron Tooth," Jack said. The man nodded once. "I'm Jack Murdoch." Another nod. The warriors behind Iron Tooth remained silent, still as the trees. "She's inside," Jack said. "She's alive. And she's safe." Iron Tooth did not speak for a long time. He studied Jack, eyes sharp and dark like flint. Then he said, in low, measured English, "You are the one who sheltered her. I. You knew who she was. Eventually. You understand what it means to keep the daughter of a Comanche chief in your home. I understand what it means to help a child bleeding in the woods." That made Iron Tooth's gaze narrow, but not in anger. In thought. Jack reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out the carved wolf totem. He held it out in his open hand. "She gave me this," he said. "I think she wanted me to understand. And I did." Iron Tooth looked at the totem, then at Jack's face. Then he looked past him, to the cabin door. It opened. Nayeli stepped out slowly, bare feet brushing against the wooden porch, the morning light catching the feather in her hair. She wore a woven wrap around her shoulders, the one she had found in Jack's chest and stitched by hand over the last few weeks. She did not walk timidly. She stepped forward with purpose. When she reached Jack's side, she looked directly into Iron Tooth's eyes. For a moment, the whole world seemed to stop. Jack felt it. The weight of all things pressing in. The warriors watched. The forest watched. Even the sky felt like it waited. Nayeli stepped past Jack and walked slowly toward her father. The distance between them closed like a wound, and when she stood before him, she reached out and touched his chest where the horn plate lay. Iron Tooth looked down at her hand, then back up into her eyes. She spoke in Comanche. Jack couldn't understand the words, but he could feel them. They were soft, careful, woven with pain and strength and memory. She spoke long, her voice low, her tone without fear. When she finished, she turned to Jack. And for the first time, she translated. "I told him you found me. I told him you could have left me. That you did not. I told him I was ready to die. And you said, 'Not today.'" Jack's chest felt tight. Iron Tooth stepped forward. Jack tensed, but the man only looked at him. "You have courage," he said. Jack nodded once. So does she. The Comanche chief reached up and unfastened the necklace around his neck. It was made of claws, bear claws, polished and drilled through with sinew. He held it out. Jack hesitated. "It is not a gift," Iron Tooth said. "It is a sign. You are not enemy." Jack took the necklace. "I don't want war," he said. "There will be no war," Iron Tooth replied. "Not here, not today." The silence broke then, like a glass pane shattered by breath. One by one, the warriors began to turn their horses. No commands, no orders, just movement. They wheeled in slow unison, fading back toward the trees like shadows retreating from light. Iron Tooth turned last. "She will return with me," he said, "but she will remember. I know. She will carry both paths. She already does." Iron Tooth mounted his horse. He looked once more at Jack, nodded, and then rode into the forest. Naomi stood between them. She looked back at Jack. Her lips trembled, just for a second. Then she crossed the distance and threw her arms around him. He knelt slightly, and his arms closed around her shoulders. "I will not forget," she whispered against his chest. "I'll be here," he said. "Always." She pulled away, tears shining but not falling. Then she turned, ran to her father's side, and mounted the horse behind him. They vanished into the trees. Jack stood alone in the clearing, the dust still hanging in the air, the thunder of hooves fading into the distance like a heartbeat slowing down. The cabin was quiet again, too quiet. He walked back inside, set the necklace on the table, and sat in his old chair by the fire. He didn't cry, he didn't smile. He just sat there, watching the embers crackle, and somewhere, deep in the woods, he knew the world had changed. Not because of bullets, not because of blood, but because one man didn't turn away, and one girl had the courage to speak. The days after they rode away stretched long and quiet. Jack Murdoch went about his chores like he always did, but the rhythm of them had changed. Every task felt slower, heavier, as if the silence left behind had seeped into the wood of the cabin, into the dirt underfoot, into his bones. He woke up earlier than he needed to. He chopped more wood than the fireplace required. He cleaned his rifle, though there was no threat on the horizon. He didn't say her name aloud. Not at first, but it lingered in the air like the scent of the herbs she used to hang in the rafters, faint but not forgotten. Naomi. She had returned to her people. That was right. That was the way of it. Still, he caught himself glancing at the chair by the fire when the light dimmed, half expecting to see her there, fingers twisting a cord of leather, eyes half-lidded in thought. The bed sat neatly made now, untouched. She hadn't left anything behind except the carved wolf totem, which Jack kept on the table where he could see it. Every time his hand passed over the worn edges, it stirred something in his chest that he didn't have words for. Spring bled into summer. The forest thickened with green, and the stream ran stronger from the melting snow in the hills. Jack repaired the barn roof, dug new trenches around the perimeter, replanted the herb garden Naomi had started. He kept it alive, even though he had no use for half of what she had sown. It was the only part of her he could still tend to. And then, one morning, a small object appeared on the porch. A feather, black and red, braided with white sinew. Jack bent to pick it up and stared at it for a long time. He hadn't heard a horse, hadn't seen tracks, but it was there, laid precisely in the spot she used to sit each morning. He didn't smile, but something inside him eased. The next week, a bundle of roots was tucked beneath the porch rail, wrapped carefully in rabbit hide. Medicine root. Good for fevers. Jack didn't need it, but he boiled it anyway, just to smell it in the cabin. He began to speak to her then, quietly, when no one could hear. Sometimes just a few words before bed, sometimes a full sentence. He didn't expect a reply. It wasn't about that. It was about the bond that had been made in fire and silence and choice. That kind of bond didn't vanish when someone left. It lingered. It changed the shape of a man. The townsfolk never heard the full story. Duncan at the trading post asked once, just once, what had happened that morning when the Comanche surrounded his home. Jack told him it was a misunderstanding and the matter was settled. Duncan, to his credit, didn't push. But word spread all the same. Not from Jack's lips, but from those who passed through the valley later, travelers and traders and scouts who told tales of the strange sight they'd witnessed from afar. A war band, fully painted, gathering at dawn, and leaving without raising a hand. People began calling him the man who faced the storm. Some said he had made a pact with the Comanche. Others claimed he had captured a princess and won her father's mercy with magic. Jack never corrected them, let them believe whatever gave them comfort. The truth was too quiet, too deep for the kind of men who needed legends. One afternoon, months after the warriors vanished into the pines, Jack found something by the stream where the stones were warm and smooth from the sun. A figure sat there, small, cloaked in a deerskin wrap. When he approached, The figure did not move, only tilted its head. It was a boy, no more than 10, barefoot, with long dark hair and watchful eyes. He didn't speak, just held out a bundle wrapped in red cloth. Jack took it and opened the folds. Inside was a necklace of beads and bone, woven into the shape of a crescent moon. Around it was a lock of hair, thin, black, bound with a strip of the same leather Nayeli used to tie her braids. He looked up, but the boy was already gone, vanished into the woods without a sound. Jack sat by the stream for a long time with the bundle in his lap, the wind stirring the grass around him. He closed his hand around the necklace and held it to his chest. From then on, gifts arrived every few weeks, not all the time, and never accompanied by words. Dried meat in the coldest part of winter, a small pouch of crushed sage, a painted stone with a mark he recognized from the dream catcher she'd once drawn in the dirt. He never left anything in return, but he made a habit of leaving the cabin door unlatched some nights, just in case a wind chose to blow through it. That summer, the rains came late. The riverbed cracked, and the trees shed early. Jack took his rifle and traveled further west than usual, checking his old trap lines and cutting across lands he hadn't crossed in years. Near the third ridge, he came across a clearing where horses had been gathered. The ground bore deep hoof prints. Ashes smoldered in a large pit where a fire had burned not long ago, and carved into a tree at the edge of the clearing was a symbol, a wolf, curled around a flame. He didn't touch it. He simply nodded and moved on. By autumn, Jack had stopped counting the days since she left. The ache of her absence dulled, not from forgetfulness, but from understanding. He had helped someone who needed it. He had made a choice to be more than what war had turned him into, and in doing so, he had been given something he didn't expect: forgiveness, not from the world, from himself. When the snow began to fall, he started carving again. It had been years since he'd held a blade for anything other than survival, but the totem she'd left him inspired something. He shaped animals from pine blocks, foxes, deer, ravens. He lined them up on the mantel, one by one, each made slowly, with care. Then one night, without deciding, he carved her face. Not perfect, not detailed, but her. The tilt of her head, the curve of her eyes, the strength in the line of her chin. He placed the carving beside the wolf totem and stepped back. The firelight danced across the wood, casting long shadows on the walls. He whispered her name that night as he drifted to sleep. The wind outside howled through the eaves, not wild, not angry, just moving, restless, but free. And in the morning, another gift sat on the porch, a circle of small stones, bound with sinew, with a sprig of sage in the center. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew who it was from. The seasons passed. Winters softened. Springs returned. Jack's beard turned whiter, his steps slower, but his eyes stayed sharp, always turned to the horizon when he sat on his porch. He grew used to being known as the strange man in the valley. Travelers passed through from time to time. None stayed long. Some asked for stories. Others just watched the tree line like they expected something to emerge. Once, a group of soldiers stopped by, asking about the Comanche routes. Jack sent them in the wrong direction. Not far enough to endanger them, but far enough to protect the silence. He wasn't alone as much as he used to be. He had the wind, the trees, the mule, old but stubborn. And the visits, always quiet, always unspoken, but always there. Years later, an old Comanche woman visited the trading post. Duncan said she carried herself like royalty and that she spoke fluent English, though she preferred not to. She wore a carved wolf around her neck and bore a long scar down her arm that she traced absently when she was thinking. She asked only one question: "Does the man in the cabin still live?" Duncan told her yes. She bought nothing, just nodded and left. Jack never saw her, but a few days later, a blanket appeared on his porch. Woven by hand, strong, warm. On it was stitched a pattern of two figures, a man and a girl, sitting beside a fire. The smoke curled up into the sky in a long, thin thread, carried by the wind. Jack wrapped himself in it that night, and for the first time in years, he dreamed. Not of war, not of loss, but of a child sitting beside him, whispering her name into the dark. And the fire between them never went out. Sometimes, the fiercest battles are not fought with rifles or spears, but with compassion, courage, and the choice to do what's right, even when it means standing alone. Jack Murdoch didn't just shelter a girl. He sheltered a legacy of hope, a bridge between two worlds, and a love that needed no bloodline to be real. In the silence of the pines and the thunder of hooves, he became more than a man. He became a story worth remembering. If this story moved your heart, imagine what else awaits in the untamed lands of the Wild West Love Chronicles. Subscribe now and saddle up for more unforgettable tales of honor, heartbreak, redemption, and love forged under the wild skies. Don't miss the next journey. Hit that subscribe button and ride with us into the next frontier.